Here we're looking at the Christopher Reeve version of Clark Kent, and we will look at the different aspects of this costume going from head to toe. And let's jump in right now and have a look. There is Christopher Reeve playing Clark Kent and Superman, and we'll get into the hair issue in a second where you can see the part is on a different side. But looking at Clark Kent's glasses, here we've moved away from the black wireframe that we've seen in both the previous 1940s and 1950s version. Even the 1960s 66 version from Bob Holliday was very different. Here we have the look more of a brown. Would you call them horn-rimmed glasses?
Somewhat. That's as good a description as any.
So, again, we've got the glass lenses in there, which sometimes, I don't know if we can see if that's a reflection of somebody in the glasses. Could be Dick Donner in there. But nevertheless, we have a different style of glasses than what we've seen in the past, which I prefer the thicker kind of frame in a glass, in a frame for the glasses, for the spectacles, because it does act as a kind of a mask in a way that it's a bit more hiding his face.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. You know, when you look at how and he had those really even in Superman 4 to a certain extent, but especially into like Superman 3, he had those very large frames that kind of dominated the upper part of his face, and it does do a lot to kind of mute what Christopher Reeve looks like. So it's something that when I think of Superman and his glasses, those are kind of what I think of.
In the comments, John Patrick Van Pelt asks if the glasses were made from the ship that brought Clark Kent to Earth, and that's our super chat there from John. Not necessarily in this version. It doesn't really state anything along those lines. We're never really told where the glasses come from. In fact, we're never even really told where the costume comes from, other than we do know that the material is in his duffel bag that he takes to the fortress, but we don't know whether Martha had made the suit beforehand or whether the fortress somehow turned those blankets that he came to Earth into a costume. It's never really explained, but you can kind of draw your own conclusions. But the glasses are definitely not ever mentioned as being anything other than glasses that he bought from a store.
Yeah, the ship that he came in these movies did not have a windshield, so there's really not one. I think the only time I've ever really seen Clark show where he gets his glasses was in an episode of Superboy, where he was going through like old glasses in the barn that were his father's, and that's how he picked out what glasses he was going to wear. So. Yeah, it's a really good. It's a good question because it does bring up the fact that in the pre-crisis era, the lenses did come from the ship because that way, his heat vision could go through it without melting it, which is a problem Clark was having as Superboy in his Superboy years. So, good question, John. That's a fun one.
I remember in Lois and Clark, Dean Cain would often lower the glasses to use his heat vision. To get around that problem. But then we move on to the hat. And again, love the fedora and love the style of it. And again, it just goes to mask his look somewhat and give Clark Kent an appearance that is a different silhouette to Superman, and therefore kind of pushes the whole secret identity thing even further. I love having the fedora as part of Clark Kent's get-up.
Yeah, and he's so good with it, he can throw it on a hat hook without looking. So, but yeah, I like the fedora too.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think is not a must, but it definitely goes a long way towards. And it's in the 70s, men were still wearing hats, so it was still part of. It didn't stand out too much. But I like the fact that Clark Kent comes across as being from a earlier period, that he is a bit of a dork, that he's not up to date with the times. I know in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, they brought him up to date and they made him, more of a modern man. But I like if we're going with the whole secret identity, mild-mannered thing, that his style is dated and that he is not up
Yeah.
to date with the modern fashions.
Yeah, he's more of a conservative dresser.
Yeah.
May not be, and I mean that in terms of not a political slant, but
No.
just in terms of he's not. There were no, and there never will be any websites dedicated to Clark Kent's ties from the movies, like there was for Dean Kane's ties in the '90s.
Yes. So funny. And then we look at the suit, and here I've got one of the models that were created, because we don't really have a lot of great photos of the entire suit, but this is modeled after one version of the suit. And I love the three-piece suit. I know it's a
Yep.
throwback. I love it. I love the look of it. Having a vest underneath the jacket, the pinstripes. I love that. I love that the tie is, very 70s. It's got a pattern to it. And
It's
you just got
wide.
yeah, it's wide. Even the collar is fairly wide, so even on the jacket and the dress shirt. So it's very much an office look from that period, but very classy still.
Yeah, it's one of the things that would kind of change in Superman 4.
Yeah.
In Superman's 1, 2, and 3, I mean, Superman 3, he had that god awful brown suit, which would lead certain news stations over here probably having a fit if their treatment of a past president is any indication. But when you look at what Clark wears, especially since 1 and 2 were filmed pretty much at the same time for the most part,
Yeah.
and even the reshoots on 2, you were still in the '70s, so you did have those wide collars on the shirt, and that one isn't particularly as wide as some of the other. I don't know what it was about the '70s that men had to wear a tie that was basically the circumference of their neck. Um, but when you see, like in Superman 4, he's dressing more of a later '80s
Yeah.
suit with a thinner tie and a thinner shirt. But I'm with you. I always think that Clark looks great in a three-piece suit.
Mm-hmm.
I like seeing him in like the shirt and tie, but I like it when he's wearing a vest too, because and Alex Ross drew a fantastic version of this type of suit in the what is that called, the Christmas treasury sized book that he did
Right.
with Paul Dini. But no, I really I like it when Clark wears a suit. It's just I don't think it's bad when he doesn't, but especially for these movies, Clark Kent wearing a three-piece suit just feels right.
Yeah, exactly. Another super chat question from John Patrick Van Pelt asking, was the blue suit that we saw Christopher Reeve wear, was that the same collar we saw him in the animated series? It's a bit of a stretch. I think it's just a suit.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think there's any correlation.
yeah. They rarely put him in the blue suit with the red and black striped tie that he was in the comics at the time. And
Mm,
if you're curious as to why all of his suits or most of his suits looked the same, is because in the comics of the '60s and '70s and into the '80s, he had treated his suits with a chemical that allowed him to compress them to put into his cape pouch, and that
right.
turned them blue.
There you go. There's the explanation. Very good. And then we get to the hair. And as we kind of mentioned at the very start, Clark Kent in this movie, in these series of movies, parts his hair on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, where Superman parts his hair on the left. Another
Mm-hmm.
distinction between the two that makes the look completely different. And here it's very kind of flattened, and there's the waviness has kind of gone out of it, and there's obviously no hint of a spit curl or a curl at the front. So very bland, mild mannered hair.
Yeah, it's muted and it's meant to look that way. It looks like the hair of a man that wears a hat.
Yes, exactly.
So
Very good. And then overall, obviously, he wore different suits, and this is, I think, from Superman 2,
yep,
where he
that'll be
comes
one of
in
the
at the
reshoots.
end. Yeah, and a different suit and tie or what have you there, but still the three-piece look. But overall, love the Clark Kent look for Christopher Reeve's version of the character. I think it's, what I think about when I think of Clark Kent, especially when the fedora is being worn. So a solid 9 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, it's extremely formative. I mean, this is the version that I really became familiar with more than anything else growing up. So it's like one of those things, like when you get into the comics post crisis, his wardrobe is a little better. He's more apt to roll up his sleeves and loosen the tie and all that, look like a little more laid back. Um, but this is, when I was a kid, this is what I would think of as Clark Kent.
Yes, exactly. And Nostalgic Pod Blast mentioned that, yes, Christopher Reeve did wear wigs in some of the films, whether it was the Superman wig or Clark Kent. So definitely there were wigs used. Not that you could tell so much. And then when John Patrick Van Pelt asks what kind of hair gel did Clark use, I don't think there was gel back in the 70s, early 80s. I think it was more Brill cream.
Yeah, it was a little double do ya. Yeah, you look so debonair. Why do I know the jingle for Brill cream? Why do I have that in my memory?
Wow. So there we have it. There is the Clark Kent analysis of the costume worn by Christopher Reeve, or the look of Clark Kent as brought to us by Christopher Reeve in the 4 Superman films. Next week, we will move forward and we will look, I think next up would be Dean Cain's version of Clark Kent.
Yeah, if we're skipping over the Clarks of Superboy, yes.
Yeah, we'll come back to those maybe later in the series. But next up is looking at Superman, not Superboy versions. We will move to Dean Cain's version of Clark Kent, which is very different. So we'll be back next week with that.